Welcome to Everything Life and Real Estate. Let's get started with our hosts, Linda McKissick and Dana Gentry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Everything Life and Real Estate. I'm Linda McKissick.
And I'm Dana Gentry.
Hey, Dana, what's new with you?
Hey there, just wrapped up 2 crazy days of our live streams for agents all across the country, giving value, and yours was like a hit. You and Jason Abrams were like the two everybody said, bring them back again. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been great. It was really good.
Well, for our listeners, is there any way they can get access to any of that if they miss those live events?
Yes, actually tonight we are going to be dropping every single video, which there were 13, on the Keller Williams Ohio Valley Region YouTube channel. And so if you just search Keller Williams Ohio Valley Region on YouTube, you'll pull up the channel, and all of them are going to be on there tonight. So it'll be a good place for everybody to go and watch them.
Awesome. Great. That's fantastic. Well, I am super excited about our guest today, Dr. Jeff Gladden. And I met, I guess, a few years ago at a Strategic Coach, in which everybody knows how much I brag about Strategic Coach, a program a few years ago. And a friend of mine and his friend also, Lee Brower, said, if you're in Dallas, Texas, and you're not using this guy, you're crazy. So that's how Jeff and I hooked up. And our audience, Jeff, is always hearing me talk about things that you share with me. Well, the best I can translate them anyway. The things that you share with me and the things that you've helped me with. So why don't you kind of kick us off and just give us a little bit of bio about Dr. Jeff Gladden and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, happy to do that. Well, thanks for having me on, Dana. Nice to be here with you as well.
Yes,
So my background is basically cardiology. You know, I went to medical school in Philadelphia at Temple, and then I was at Case Western in Cleveland for 3 years doing internal medicine. And then I went to Colorado, and it was at the University of Colorado. I did cardiology for 3 years. And then I moved to Texas back in 1988. And the reason I moved down here was because it was really a target-rich environment, a lot of chicken fried steak, tobacco chewing, people that needed a cardiologist, right? So I wanted to get busy, and I wanted to practice my skills, if you will. So anyway, I ended up doing that for about 25 years here. And in the context of doing that, I ended up starting my own heart group called Advanced Heart Care. We ended up with 10 offices and about 12 docs. And we flew around in a little A36 Bonanza to get to Southeast Oklahoma and East Texas and things like that. And I helped smaller communities start cardiac catheterization laboratories and cardiac rehabs and imaging processes and things like that. And then had the opportunity to reunite actually with one of my former partners from one of the earlier groups that I was with. And we, together with a guy from Baylor, co-founded a large heart hospital here in Plano, Texas, just north of Dallas. And that's become a very prominent, well thought of, well-respected heart hospital. And in the context of that, you know, I have an entrepreneurial background too, so I'm not just a physician, and that's how Linda and I met, was as Strategic Coach. In fact, I just hung up with Dan Sullivan on a call 5 minutes before I jumped on this call. So, and as you guys know, Dan is the head of Strategic Coach. But in that entrepreneurial world, I became involved with owning cath labs and building the heart hospital and building my own group. And then I got involved with several medical device companies. And I'm still involved with a pharma startup and 2 other medical device companies at this point in time. But, you know, a funny thing happened to me along the way. And that is in my 50s, I got sick. And so, you know, I had a lot going on. And I basically wasn't feeling well. I was putting on weight around the middle. I was tired. I was having trouble getting out of bed. And when I would come under stressful situations, I would feel myself kind of going over a cliff into a depressive state, you know, feeling depressed, anxious. And it was the kind of thing that you couldn't talk yourself out of. It's not like you could rationalize it and make it go away. It was just, you were going over that waterfall, right? You were just, next thing you were, it's like, man, I don't feel good. And so I basically went and got tested by some of my colleagues, and all my blood work came back and everything else was done. And basically they just said, hey, you know, everything checks out okay. You're just getting older. And why don't we start you on an antidepressant? And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to go down that path. That is not what I want to do. And, I kind of remembered my grandmother on my mom's side telling me, Jeff, you never want to get old. It is hell to get old. Don't get old.
Mm.
I must have heard her tell me that for 10
Yes.
or 15 years.
Yes.
My grandfather echoed that. Then my father echoed that. Now my mother is still echoing that to me, that it's hell to get old and you don't want to go there. And, when you think about it, what do we value about ourselves, right? We value our athleticism. We value our sexuality. We value our intellectual capability, our ability to create, our ability to contribute. And you see the average 90-year-old or 100-year-old, and you don't see them being fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced, creative, contributing to lots of people in the ways that, all of us on this podcast would like to be doing. So it was at that point that I realized that traditional medicine didn't have the answer for me. And I threw myself into functional medicine and integrative medicine and age management medicine. And it took me about 2.5 years, really a little bit more, to actually crack the code for myself as to what was going on. And what was really going on was that I had something called subclinical hypothyroidism, which means that my blood work all looked quote unquote normal with regards to thyroid function, but at a tissue level, I was not getting enough thyroid into my cells. And even more importantly, I have a genetic trait where I don't convert T4, which is the inactive thyroid, into active thyroid T3 in my brain. I have an 80% deficit in being able to do that. So once I actually was able to figure that out and get on the right combination of T3 and T4, it was like somebody turned the lights back on for me.
And Jeff, from my experience too, going to regular doctors, the levels that they say to you is okay, if you go to a functional doctor, would be totally different. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And the reason is that all of the normal values on lab tests are based on the bell-shaped curve of the general population.
Mm-hmm.
So normal is what's normal. But of course, what everybody wants and what we are going for is optimal. We want to be in an optimal range, not in a normal range. So that was a big insight for me. And then I also figured out I was low on testosterone. So once I got testosterone and DHEA back into my system, I'd always been working out. I'd always been an athlete. I played soccer in college. I mountain bike, snowboard, surf, things like that. Still do that. I basically started to put on muscle and lose fat. And then the whole depression thing really had to do with the way that I make certain neurotransmitters genetically. And once I did the testing to figure out that whole piece and got on the right combination of supplements, I could come under tremendous stress and not get depressed. And I have to tell you that layering in some meditation, which I do a couple times a day, has been also very instrumental in maintaining focus through everything that goes on in our lives. But really getting the biochemistry right was an absolute game changer for me.
Well, one of the things, I love this, and one of the things that you said in the book, Suzanne Summers, her newest book, A New Way to Age, which I followed her since her very first book, and everybody's thought she's a whack job and everything else, but good Lord, I want to look like she does. At 76 years old, I want to look like she does.
Oh, she does. She looks amazing.
She looks amazing. And I've read every book that she has out. And so Jeff is featured in this new book. And one of the things that you say in there, Jeff, is that questions empower our minds. And so kind of talk a little bit about that. I think you might have gotten that from Lee early on, and it kind of made you think.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Lee Brower was the one that turned me on to the power of questions and how our minds actually respond much more to a question than they do a statement. And in the context in which we're talking here, where that becomes relative or relevant is because when I was practicing traditional cardiology, I was practicing what I'll call sick care medicine. And I'd been trained in a certain way. I'd learned a certain set of answers, and I'd learned a certain set of questions, if you will. And so I would ask you, are you having chest pain? Are you short of breath? Are you having palpitations? And so in life, we really only get the answers to the questions that we're asking. And so when I realized that traditional medicine didn't hold the answers for me, and it doesn't really hold the answers for any of us when it comes to optimizing health, I started to ask a different question. Once I started feeling really good again, I started to wonder, geez, I wonder how good we can be. I wonder how fit, how strong, how mentally sharp, and for how many years and decades can we carry that forward? And that is a completely different question than, are you feeling bad? Are you short of breath? And with that, we get a tremendous number of new answers. The interesting thing about Apex, which is the medical practice that I have, Apex, HHPLO.com, Health, Human Performance, and Longevity Optimization. The beautiful thing about us is that, you know, we have lots and lots of answers, but we're not married to a single one of them. A lot of them are innovative. A lot of them are things that your listeners haven't heard of yet or are not fully comprehensive of. And yet we're not married to a single one of those answers. We're really only married to that question, how do we get it right for the individual? And how can that person be their best self? And how good can they be? And I think in life, even in your own business or even in your relationships, I think it's important to know that the questions you're asking, how is this the best marriage we can make it? How is this the best relationship we can have? How is this the best business that we can have? It's the questions that drive your growth, not, hey, this is how we do it. You know, not these are our answers. The answers, I think, are constricting. You know, when you think about it, even politically or religiously, people get married to a set of answers and then they spend their time defending those answers, right? And so everything that comes at them is perceived as a threat to those set of answers. But when you're actually open to asking the question, there's great community in asking questions, because you can bring your current answers and you can modify them, you can change them, you can adapt them, you can grow and you can learn. And I think that's why, you know, that was the beauty of what Lee taught us. And it's basically how I've allowed it to permeate my entire professional and personal life.
I love it. And, you know, something that I think you are definitely on the cutting edge of, that I think we'll start to see more and more. I listen to tons of podcasts, a lot of health ones. And I think we're going to see more and more is what we can learn from our genes, and that, you know, our genes don't necessarily determine we will get something or whatever. But talk to us a little bit about, I was amazed at what many different kinds of genes and what they tell you. Like, for example, you know, just learning that there is actually a set of fit genes that tell you personally what's the best way to work out and things like that. So kind of, if you would just, for the, you know, our people out there listening, what are some of the different categories that people can learn things from their genes? What are those?
That was one of my biggest questions, Linda.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, let's start with genetics. Let's even take a step back from that, because I think most of us, you know, when we went to high school or college or whatever, we had a biology course and we were told that, you know, this is the DNA, it resides in the nucleus, these are the genes, and the genes basically are the blueprint for the cell and for the organism, right? And so we've come away with this concept that our genes are in some way our blueprint. Our genes are somehow our destiny, right? In actual fact, genes don't work that way. Genes are actually information, and they're information that interacts with the environment. So genes are actually, they're not a set in stone blueprint. Now, if you're born with Down syndrome or Tay-Sachs disease or cystic fibrosis, yes, that's a genetic, you know, determinant kind of event. But for most of us, our genes around, you know, exercise or cardiovascular health or brain health or hormonal health or, you know, all those kinds of things, they're not fixed in stone. And the environment that you actually put those genes into has a great effect in terms of how those genes will ultimately be expressed. So for example, you may have the quote unquote heart attack gene, the 9p21 gene. Brad Bale wrote a book about this called the heart attack gene. You may have that gene, and yet if you do things properly with your lifestyle, etc., you can make that gene go quiet. You can do things to neutralize its effect on your life. So it's really, really important, I think, for people to understand what cards they've been dealt, because everybody's playing a hand, right? Everybody's playing a hand. The problem is most people don't know what hand they're playing. And then if they do, they don't know how to play that hand. And so in our practice, what we focus on many things, but one of the fundamental things that we focus on is let's understand what hand you've been dealt, and let us help coach you on how best to play that hand, right?
Yeah.
So that's how we dive in with the genes.
I love it. And some of the things that you've helped me understand is, genetically, what's the best way for me to eat. And I believe we are going to learn over the next few years that not everyone should follow the very same plan like most people would want you to believe. It's only this way and it's only that way. So do you think that has to do with where we genetically came from? Because everybody's different. I hear on podcasts, because I do intermittent fasting, and so does our audience. But for some people, they can tolerate carbs better than other people, and for some people, So do you think that has to do with genetically where we came from, or what?
No, I think it really does. I think we know that there is a gene out there called the amylase gene, and it's a gene that codes for a protein. The protein is amylase, and amylase is basically an enzyme, and it's secreted in your saliva, and it helps you break down carbohydrates. And you can have one copy of the amylase gene, or you can have 2 copies or 5 copies, all the way up to 20 copies of the amylase gene. So it's the same gene, it's just you have more copies of the same gene. It's redundant, if you will. It turns out that the more copies of the amylase gene you have, the more carb adapted you are. The better you get along with carbs. The more you can eat carbs without gaining weight, the better you can utilize carbs for fuel. The more weight you can carry without becoming diabetic. It turns out that the fewer copies of the amylase gene that you have, the more of a paleo person you are, the more carbs actually can work against you if you get too many of them. And you put on weight with them. And you can become diabetic or have insulin resistance and a lower body weight if you have fewer copies of the amylase gene. So, a lot of people are saying, well, I'm going to go keto. I'm going to go paleo. I'm going to go vegan. I'm going to go vegetarian. I'm going to go grass-fed beef. I'm going to put butter in my coffee, and by God, everybody, because I'm doing it, everybody needs to be doing it. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you that is just so far from true. It's absolutely not true, because when we see people come to us and it's like, oh yeah, MCT oil, butter in my coffee and everything, and their cholesterol is 400, it's like, you know what, this isn't actually working for you. Mm-hmm. And yet there are other people for whom that works beautifully, and we encourage them to go down that path. We're kind of agnostic as to what path you go down. We just want you to go down the right path for you. That's really all we're after. So
yeah, and one of the things that was very interesting that you helped me discover this past year in my testing was I was all into Orange Theory because it's the hottest thing. And, being a quick start and an entrepreneur, I want the quickest way to everything. And so if I can go, do a real quick 20-minute HIIT interval training rather than run for 35, 40 minutes like I was doing, guess which one I'm going to pick, right? Sure. And you very quickly, helped me see that, Linda, this is not working for you. You have to go back to 35, 40-minute long consistent runs with your heart rate from here to here. And so I think those are the kind of things that people miss if they're not in tune with trying to figure out what is best for them.
Yeah, exactly. So you're very familiar with one of the tests that we do, usually a couple times a year with people as we work with them, and it's a cardiopulmonary exercise test. And this is a test where you basically pedal a bike and you're wearing a face mask that's measuring how much oxygen you're consuming and how much CO2 your body is producing and that you're blowing off, if you will. And from that, we get incredibly precise information about the status of the cardiovascular system. We can see if there's any blockage in an artery or dysfunction with the heart. We can see that well before we would see it with virtually any other test, quite honestly. We love this test because we can preemptively diagnose heart disease and then steer people away from having a problem. In the context of that test, we measure one variable. We measure lots of variables, but one variable in particular called VO2 max. And VO2 max, you can understand VO2 max as basically how much blood can your heart pump. And the units on it are milliliters of blood pump per kilogram of body weight per minute. So in essence, it's how much blood can your heart pump. And it's also, the corollary to that is how much oxygen can your body use. So it turns out that the higher your VO2 is, the lower your all-cause mortality is. Mm. So if you want to live longer, if you want to be a fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced 100-year-old, and really in my world, we're trying to make 100 the new 30. That's really what we're going for. Mm-hmm. And we have a podcast called Living Beyond 120. But if you want to do that, And if you want to be fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced at 100 and not look like the average 100-year-old, you need a big VO2 max. So what we found is a lot of people have become enamored with interval training, whether it's on a Vasper machine, whether it's Orange Theory, whether it's I'm doing circuit training at the gym, whether it's CrossFit, whatever it is. And they come in and we test them. And guess what? Their VO2s go down. They don't go up, they go down. And so if you're going to have a big VO2, and that's what's really linked to longevity, what we found is that people need to do more protracted cardio. So you're all familiar with Eliud Kipchoge, who basically just broke the 2-hour barrier for the marathon, right? It was kind of a contrived race, etc., but nonetheless, he did it. And the way those guys train is not by doing interval training. And they have big VO2s. The way they train is they'll go run for 5 hours at about a 10-minute mile pace, 9-minute mile pace, very slow run. Then they'll do tempo training where they'll run at their race pace, which is, about 4.5 minutes a mile. And they'll do that for 45 minutes or an hour. But the point is they're building a big cardio base by putting in time doing cardiovascular exercise. And so, Linda, when I had you switch over and switch from just doing the interval training, back to let's put in 45-minute runs, let's put in some, other things that you like to do, but let's do it for 30 to 45 minutes. You came back in and we retested you, and guess what? Your VO2 had gone back up, right? Yeah. And so I love that for you because I want you to be around a long time to help a lot of people.
Me too.
Exactly. And I feel really good about the progress that you've made. So now we've set new targets for you, but it's really important for the audience to understand that being able to know what your VO2 is a great way for you to see where you are in your fitness regimen.
Well, yeah, and I even remember when we first tested, you said I was doing half marathons. Yep. I had done a marathon also, but kind of didn't like the stressful training for that. So I had kind of stuck myself on half marathons. And one of the things that we discovered with my genes is that I should really not exercise longer than about 2 hours. So the good news is my half was a little bit over 2 hours. And I thought, okay, well, my goal is to get that under 2 hours so that I stay within what I should be.
This is a great point also. This is a great point because not everybody is built to be a marathoner. You have people that, I want to go climb Everest. Okay, well, great. Well, not everybody's built for that kind of altitude. Okay, I want to be a marathoner. Why? Because it's cool. Or I want to be an Ironman because that's going to be so cool. What we find is that people simply aren't built for that level of oxidative stress. That's what happens. You're basically making so much energy in ATP and burning it that you throw off all these free radicals. It's like your engine throwing off a lot of exhaust because you just decided to drive it 600 miles. And you overwhelm your body's ability to deal with that. And so a lot of endurance athletes are actually aging themselves prematurely. And you can actually moderate that by drinking something called molecular hydrogen. We have a product called H2 Max. And basically molecular hydrogen balances the redox system. We do have some Ironmen and some triathletes we work with, and they'll drink it and it says that it's like pulling out the old battery and putting in the new. And we drink it before we work out because it'll actually protect your body from the workout while you do that 45-minute run. At the same time, it allows your body to get stronger from the work that you're putting in. So things like that are really important to understand who you are. Otherwise, you can overdo it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Dana, did you have a question?
I have a ton, but you go ahead.
Well, I want to finish my last question, then I'll let you ask all yours, Dana. But I have to have you tell our audience, because they've heard me talk about this and they've cracked up over my appetite.
I know what you're going to say.
I cannot explain it to them. Will you please explain to them what that means when you have the Apatite gene?
We've had more questions around Linda's Apatite gene than maybe anything else.
Well, believe it or not, there are some genes that correlate with putting on weight. And there are some genes that correlate with your a couple different things. Really, your appetite, how attractive food is to you, whether or not you have a snacking gene or not, and also whether or not your brain gets the signal that you've eaten enough. So when you put together all those genetics, and then you put together the genetics of how you burn fat, do you burn fat in the context of exercise, or do you burn fat just to make heat? Some people have these uncoupling proteins. I happen to have them. And we basically burn fat just to make heat. So you stay warm, right? You're out in the wintertime, you wear lighter clothing and you're warm. I was encouraging you, Linda, I think, to swim in the ocean in San Diego, right? Because you can upregulate fat burning that way.
Because the water's cold? Is that what it is?
Water's cold, exactly.
Yeah, because I don't have that. My body does not burn fat for heat. It only burns when I exercise.
That's right.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. But you could do that in the ocean, in the cold. You could start to stimulate certain genes. So anyway, it becomes really important. So for some people, depending on what their genes are, they're actually fine if they walk into a room and there's a party going on and they don't eat anything. They're actually fine. They're not even all that hungry.
Those are all our thin friends.
Yeah.
It's actually fine. But there are a lot of people that have a gene. This is a snacking gene, actually. It has to do with melanocortin. And basically, once you start, it's over. Once you start, you're not stopping, right? You're not stopping till you eat the whole bowl of whatever it is that's in front of you. The whole pack of Oreos or whatever it is. So it's really important, again, to understand your genetics and where the lines have to be drawn. Then there are other people that simply will sit down to a meal and they keep eating because everybody's eating. They don't get the same signal that they're full. Their brain doesn't get that signal. They don't get the leptin signal to the brain, or they have leptin resistance. And so they'll keep overeating. And for them, we have to teach them to stop eating, not when they're full, but to stop eating when they just don't feel as hungry, right? And so you have to know what cards you're playing to be able to play your cards properly.
That's great. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so I do have a couple questions now because, man, I've already taken 2 pages of notes. Okay, so I hear people all the time say, well, I am this way because everybody in my whole family is this way. Like, I have diabetes because everybody has diabetes, or I have addiction problems because everybody in my family is an alcoholic or whatever. So my question is, how much do you think genetics really play into that versus someone's everyday choices and their environment, versus like what really could come from their genetics?
That's a great question. So I'll tell you this about life in general, I think, and I'm sure you guys will agree with me on this, is that I think life really comes down to the mindset that you have. What questions are you asking and what's your mindset? So if you're asking the question, how do I lead my best life, right? My dad smoked. Does that mean that I'm going to be a smoker? No, not necessarily. Other people have alcoholism in their family. Well, if you're asking the question, how do I live my best life? You see what I'm saying? It starts to steer you away from doing that. Yes, you may have the genes, and there are genes out there that predispose you to becoming an alcoholic. But really, I think mindset trumps all of that. And then you can create an environment that supports the mission that you're after. But again, I think it's kind of a little bit of a cop-out to just say, well, everybody in my family, therefore, yes, you may be heavier than some people. You may be bigger boned. You may be whatever else. But still, I see people all the time in here at Apex who have the genes to be overweight, and they're not overweight. They are not overweight. And it's because they've chosen a lifestyle of activity, of being outside. They exercise. They are mindful of what they eat. And it's really their mindset that's doing it.
And one thing you told me very beginning when I started working with you, Jeff, was some of when we talked about the Apatite gene, you said, look, Linda, I said, well, what does that actually mean to me? Give me a layman term of what that means to me. And he said, you will never be able to trust your willpower. You will have to have a system around that. So I think that's things people need to know too, that yeah, you could, because I think there is actually even a gene that is a more addictive gene, right? I'm pretty sure I remember hearing you saying that. So those people may have to know that and say, well, because of that, I'm going to make sure I'm not ever in those situations.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if you're really talking about optimizing your health, right? And certainly we're in the middle of COVID and everything else. And, you start to think about, well, what are your real assets? Right? What are your real assets? Your stock portfolio went down, you're this, this or that, or whatever it is. What are your real assets here? Your health. Your health is your asset, right? Your relationships, right? The values that you have, your mindsets, those are your real assets, right? Yes. So you really want to be taking care of those in these tough times.
Yeah, that's so true. And that as we kind of round out our time here, that reminds me, because of that, I think I'm more grateful for my health and for what you're doing to help me with my health and my mindset and all those things. So what would be some advice? I know you had some great advice the other day. You sent me a great video about what is a real simple plan people can do right now to kind of protect themselves, in your opinion.
Yeah, so I think it is really important to protect yourself. I think COVID-19 is for real. It's not just a flu, it is a pandemic. Regular people are getting really sick from it. It is going to take some lives. And it's really not anything we've ever seen before. So none of us really have, a built up immunity to it. I think it's really important to practice the social distancing mandates that are in play. Keep your distance from people, that sort of thing. That being said, I also think it's important to exercise. So, even with a lot of us being under house arrest, and we are currently here in Dallas, there are basically dispensations for getting out and going for an exercise, going for a run, walking your dog, things like that. So I would encourage people to exercise and not stop exercising. I think the other thing is you want to make sure you're getting good sleep. It's important to know that high stress raises your cortisol. And when your cortisol level goes up, your immune system goes down. Mm-hmm. So one of the best things I think is I sort of double down on meditation, where I'm meditating twice a day, just to keep perspective on everything that's out there and to realize that this will pass and that there's really much more to life than whatever this hiccup is, and we'll get past it. Because keeping stress down will keep your immune system strong. And then I think it's important to understand that a lot of the viruses like SARS and COVID-19, et cetera, they come out of parts of China that are depleted in selenium in the soil. And it turns out that having higher selenium levels seems to be protective. So eating a couple of Brazil nuts a day is a good way to get selenium. I think the other thing is that when you understand how the coronavirus actually enters the cell, you can help block it with zinc. So sucking on some Zicam lozenges, 1 or 2 a day, or taking a zinc supplement can be important. And then there have been some nice reports out of China using high-dose vitamin C to actually cure the disease, if you will, and take people that were on ventilators and get them back off ventilators. And so you want to keep your vitamin C levels high. So eating some vitamin C, 1,000 milligrams, maybe 3 times a day would be good. And certainly if I feel myself coming down with something, the first thing I'm going to do is get a high-dose IV vitamin C. We have that here in the clinic in Dallas. Linda, if you're close by, you could come by. And then I think one of the other things to realize is that you can get more zinc into your cells if you take it with green tea. The EGCG in green tea, and there's more EGCG in green tea than there is in black tea, actually helps push the zinc into your cells. A lot of us are iodine deficient, and iodine is really important for immune function. We're all eating sea salt. Nobody's eating Morton salt anymore, which is iodized, right? So putting some iodine back into your world, a little bit of iodoral, 12.5 milligrams a week, or mixing a little bit of regular salt back in with your sea salt to get some iodine. I think that's very important. Alcohol will really weaken your immune system. So not drinking, I think, is very safe. The H2 max is very anti-inflammatory for your respiratory pathways. And so is something called sulforaphane. Sulforaphane comes from broccoli, and it actually helps protect your respiratory tract. So I think taking sulforaphane with myronase, at Apex, we've actually put together a bundle of these things. And if people want to come into us and request it, they're welcome to at apexhhplo.com. And then there are a lot of different fresh herbs and mushrooms and things like that to boost your immune system. So I think, eating a healthy diet, lots of greens and things like that is always good. And then there's also a treatment out there now that seems to be very effective, which is hydroxychloroquine, an old malaria drug, 200 milligrams 3 times a day, mixed with azithromycin, which is from a Z-Pak. And in some smaller studies out of France, they've shown 100% viral eradication in 6 days.
Wow.
And with chloroquine alone, it was 57%. And without either, it was only about 12%. So we feel like that's also a potential ace in the hole. Those drugs are being kind of tied up by the government right now in the pharmacies. You can't just I can't write a script for you, Linda, because everything is tied up unless you have, COVID positive test. They won't release it to you.
Yeah.
But just know that that's available to you. And those would be the main things that I would let people know right now. Colloidal silver can also be a good antibiotic. So there are silver sprays out there and things like that people can use safely. So.
And actually, Jeff, before the virus came out, you actually had prescribed zinc, vitamin C, the silver spray to me because I kind of had a cold, and so I just reached out to you and said, hey, what should I be doing? So this is something that you could probably do during the season anyway.
Yes, that's right. This works for viruses in general, what I'm outlining to you. The thing
especially too, Linda, especially when traveling so much. Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I mean, when you travel as much as especially Linda does, you're around it so much more.
Yeah, I think it's very important to be doing all this stuff when you're traveling for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Dana, I think you might have had one final question. I'll let you have the last question, and then we'll let Jeff go on to his busy schedule, I'm sure.
Thank you. Yes, this has been so awesome, Jeff. I love this stuff. And so I love getting to listen to you. I'm sure our listeners will too. So for somebody who maybe hasn't had the privilege of working with you yet, and this is something that they're more interested in learning about, where should they go? What resources, maybe a book or anywhere you could point someone to? And I know you gave your website, which we'll put in our show notes, and then also maybe share a little bit about your podcast. Is that a resource?
Yeah. So Living Beyond 120 is the podcast. And then if they go to the website, apexhhplo.com, there will be links there. And we have a YouTube channel as well, Apex HHPLO. And we have lots of YouTube videos on there where people can get a feel for what we do. The magic of what we do is that we make it personal. We don't make generic recommendations. We actually unravel the knot of who a person is and then basically make very specific recommendations for them. And that's when we see, people really kind of blossom, if you will.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll check out the YouTube channel for sure. I love that.
Great.
Yeah, that's great. He has some great podcasts on his podcast also.
Oh yeah, I just sat here and looked it up while we were.
The only problem is I want every new peptide that's coming out in the world.
There are a lot. Yeah, we do some really interesting things in regenerative medicine too with peptides and things like that.
You talk about that, Linda, all the time. What are peptides for people that?
Yeah, peptides are, well, most people are familiar with the term amino acid, right? An amino acid. And if you link enough amino acids together, you get a protein, right? So let's say you have 100 amino acids, that's a protein. And there's lots of different proteins in the body. A peptide is about 50 amino acids or fewer. Insulin is a peptide. And they're basically signaling molecules. And they basically signal the body to do a whole bunch of things. They're different than drugs because drugs go in and basically interrupt some sort of biochemical pathway, right? They throw a wrench here, they throw a wrench there. And then the metabolites have to go elsewhere, so you end up with side effects. But with a peptide, what we really like about it is that it's a signaling molecule that sets off a cascade of your body's ability to heal itself. So we like that a lot, of course. It falls into the regenerative category, and we could have a whole show on peptides. In fact, there's a whole show on peptides on LB120. But super exciting stuff. Brain health. We've been able to really help people heal people's brains, improve cognitive abilities. I mean, the stuff that's available is just, people just don't fully comprehend what's out there. So it's
and I'm super excited because Jeff just sent me MOTS-C, which is the peptide that I hope helps with my fat burning. And Dana, just so you know, TaylorMade, which is the laboratories that do most of these, is actually right there in Lexington where you are. And one of our new agents, her daughter actually works there. So we got a good connection. She's telling me all about some even cool stuff that Jeff hasn't mentioned to me yet. So I'll be sending him my list.
We might have to take a tour. We might have to take a tour.
Yeah, there's new stuff coming too to help us actually prune the body of senescent cells, which actually makes you younger. And we have protocols to make your DNA younger and your telomeres longer and all kinds of things. It's just beyond the scope of what we can cover in one podcast. But
yes, well, we're just so appreciative, Jeff, of you sharing your time and knowledge. We could literally go on forever. You're so knowledgeable, and we love hearing it. So just remember, if you have a topic or a question that you'd like for Dana and I to cover on our podcast, be sure and submit it to info@everything life and real estate. And if you really want to do something great for Dana and I, be sure and leave a great review and let us know that you appreciate and like the topics that we're covering. And then the best compliment you could ever give us is pass this podcast link on to a friend or someone you know in the business world or the real estate world that you think might enjoy the conversations that we're having here. And I just want to say, Jeff, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate all the things that you've done for me, and I love you being able to share this with our listeners. And Dana, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, Jeff, so much. See you, Linda.
Be sure to subscribe for more business strategies and tactics to inspire you to live an abundant real estate life. Don't forget to rate and review so we can bring you the best content. Find this and other valuable information at everythinglifeandrealestate.com.